This is TLC to go.
Hey everyone, and welcome to this deep dive. As health sciences faculty, I'm sure you're always looking for ways to make your classrooms more inclusive and supportive. And today, we're going to tackle a topic that's super relevant to that goal: microaggressions.
Yeah, microaggressions. These are those subtle, often unintentional comments or actions that can have a surprisingly big impact on students, especially those from marginalized groups.
Exactly. It's like they say, death by 1,000 paper cuts. We're talking about things like asking a student of color, "Where are you really from?" or telling a female student, "You're pretty strong for a woman." These might seem like small things, but they can really make students feel like they don't belong.
Right, and that can affect their whole academic experience.
Absolutely. So we've got some great resources to help us unpack this topic, including research on the impact of microaggressions and practical tips from the UTHSC Teaching and Learning Center.
Yeah, those resources are a great place to start because really understanding the impact of microaggressions is kind of the first step in addressing them.
Definitely. So let's jump into that research first. Okay. I think it's important to acknowledge that microaggressions aren't just something we're imagining. They have real measurable consequences for students.
Oh, absolutely. There's been a lot of research on this, especially in STEM fields. And it shows that microaggressions can really impact students' mental health, their academic performance, their sense of belonging.
Wow, that's heavy stuff.
No.
So what exactly does that impact look like?
Well, the research points to four main areas where students are affected. Psychological well-being, so, increased stress, anxiety, depression, that kind of thing. Then there's mobility, like their ability to move freely through different academic settings without feeling like they have to constantly prove themselves.
I see.
And then there's the pressure to prove competence, so always feeling like they have to work harder and be better than their peers just to be taken seriously.
And all of that can lead to the fourth area of impact, right?
Exactly. Social isolation. Students who experience microaggressions often feel isolated and withdrawn. They might avoid participating in class or seeking help from faculty because they don't feel safe or supported.
That's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And I bet it makes it even harder for them to succeed academically.
Absolutely. So, as educators, we really need to be aware of these impacts and do what we can to create a more inclusive and equitable learning environment for all of our students.
Well said. So with that understanding of the problem in mind, let's shift gears and talk about some solutions. The UTHSC Teaching and Learning Center actually offers some really practical advice for creating that more inclusive classroom environment.
Right, they do. And one of the key things they emphasize is the importance of presenting health disparities within their full socio-historical context.
Yeah.
We need to move away from what's called a deficit model, which often focuses on individual shortcomings, rather than the systemic factors that contribute to health inequities.
So instead of just presenting the facts and figures about a particular disparity, we need to help students understand the historical and societal forces at play.
Exactly. It's about painting a more complete picture. For example, when teaching about disparities in diabetes rates,
Okay.
you could discuss how historical policies have led to inequitable access to healthy food and healthcare in certain communities.
Right.
And this helps students see the bigger picture and avoid perpetuating harmful stereotypes.
That makes a lot of sense. It's about connecting the dots between the past and the present. And I think that's a really important point for all of us to keep in mind as educators. The UTHSC guide also emphasizes the importance of diverse representation in course content.
Absolutely. And it goes beyond simply including a few token examples. It's about intentionally and thoughtfully integrating diverse perspectives and experiences throughout the curriculum.
So what would that look like in practice?
Well, it might involve featuring researchers from underrepresented backgrounds in your lectures, selecting case studies that reflect a variety of cultural backgrounds, or inviting guest speakers who can share their lived experiences.
I love that. It's about making sure that all students see themselves reflected in the material and feel like they truly belong.
Yeah.
And speaking of representation, they also talk about the power of language,
Yeah.
specifically using people-first language.
Yeah, people-first language is really important. It's about putting the person before the diagnosis or the condition.
So instead of saying a schizophrenic patient, we'd say a patient with schizophrenia.
Right, exactly. It's a small change, but it can make a big difference in how we talk about health and identity.
Absolutely. And I think it really underscores that idea of seeing the whole person, not just their condition.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
does. And it helps to create a more respectful and inclusive learning environment for everyone.
Well said. It's about recognizing the whole person, not just their condition. I'm also really intrigued by the proactive strategies they suggest for addressing microaggressions in the classroom. They recommend talking about it openly with students at the start of the semester.
Yeah, that's so important. Setting those expectations early on, really creating that safe space for learning and dialogue.
Right, because if we don't talk about it, it's like we're pretending it doesn't exist.
Exactly. And students need to understand what microaggressions are, how they can impact others, and what to do if they experience or witness one.
So it's not just about defining microaggressions, it's also about giving students the tools to deal with them.
Right. It's about empowering them to speak up and to advocate for themselves and others.
And I think that ties in really well with another strategy they suggest, using inquisitive dialogue to address microaggressions when they do occur.
Yeah, instead of immediately shutting down a conversation or getting defensive, when a student makes an insensitive remark, we can use open-ended questions to encourage reflection and understanding.
So for example, if a student says something like, well, she's a good doctor for a woman,
Right.
a faculty member might respond with, can you tell me more about what you mean by that?
Exactly. And that kind of question, it invites the student to unpack their statement and consider the implications of their words.
It's like you're giving them a chance to really think about what they're saying and why it might be problematic.
Right, and it opens up a space for dialogue and learning rather than shutting it down.
So it's not about being accusatory or judgmental. It's about being curious and wanting to understand.
Exactly. It's about approaching the situation with a growth mindset, believing that people can learn and change.
I love that. And I think it also models a willingness to engage in difficult conversations, which is so important in today's world.
Absolutely. So, along with inquisitive dialogue, the UTHSC guide also highlights the importance of what they call microaffirmations.
Oh yeah, those, I've heard the term. But to be honest, I'm not sure I fully understand how it works in practice.
Well, it's actually quite simple. Microaffirmations are small gestures of inclusion and support that can make a big difference in creating a positive and welcoming classroom environment.
So can you give us some specific examples?
Sure, active listening is a great one. When a student is speaking, make eye contact, nod your head, provide verbal cues that show you're engaged and interested in what they have to say.
That seems so basic, but I bet it makes a big difference for students, especially those who might feel marginalized or overlooked.
It absolutely does. Another example is acknowledging and validating students' contributions, even if they're small. You might say something like, "That's a really insightful point, Sarah," or "Thank you for sharing your perspective, David. It adds a lot to our discussion."
It's about making sure all students feel seen and heard.
Exactly. And when we consistently use microaffirmations, we not only create a more positive learning environment, but we also model inclusive behavior for our students.
It's like we're creating a ripple effect of positivity and respect.
I like that.
Now, what about those situations that go beyond a simple microaggression? What if a student says something blatantly offensive or discriminatory?
That's where a more structured approach might be needed. The UTHSC guide outlines a strategy called Open the Front Door.
Oh, right. Open the front door. I remember seeing that in the materials. But can you refresh our memory on how it works?
Sure, so it's an acronym, and it stands for Observe, Think, Feel, Do.
Okay. Observe, think, feel, do.
Yeah, and it encourages faculty to take a moment to pause and collect themselves before reacting to a challenging situation.
So instead of immediately responding with anger or frustration, we take a step back.
Exactly. We first observe the situation objectively, taking note of what was said and the context in which it was said. Then we think about the potential impact of the student's words on others, including ourselves. Next, we acknowledge our own feelings about the situation.
So it's about becoming more self-aware.
Right, and separating our emotional reactions from the situation itself.
And then the do part of the acronym, that's where we decide on a course of action.
Exactly. And that might involve addressing the issue directly with the student, seeking support from colleagues or administrators, or adjusting our teaching strategies to prevent similar situations from happening in the future.
It sounds like a really valuable tool for navigating those complex and sensitive moments that inevitably arise in the classroom.
It is. And it's a skill that takes practice and reflection. But the more we use it, the more equipped we'll be to create inclusive and respectful learning environments for all students.
Well, this has been an incredibly informative deep dive. I feel like I have a much better understanding of microaggressions and the role we play as educators in addressing them.
Me too. And I think it's important to remember that we're all on a journey of learning and growth when it comes to creating inclusive classrooms. We won't always get it right, but the key is to stay open to feedback, to reflect on our practices, and to keep striving to do better.
Yeah, I love that perspective. It's not about perfection. It's about continuous improvement. And I think that's a great takeaway for our listeners. as they reflect on everything we've discussed today.
It is. And thinking about, your own teaching context, what stands out to you as particularly relevant?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I'm really struck by that idea of weaving in the socio-historical context into lessons on health disparities. It just seems like such a powerful way to challenge those assumptions and help students see those systemic factors. I'm also thinking a lot about microaffirmations and how I can use those more intentionally in my classroom, to create that more supportive environment.
Yeah, those are great starting points.
Yeah.
And remember, even small changes can make a big difference. Maybe you could start by just incorporating like a brief historical overview into one of your upcoming lectures.
Yeah.
Or making a conscious effort to acknowledge each student's contribution during a class discussion.
It's about taking those first steps and then building from there. And luckily, the UTHSC article has a ton of additional resources.
It does.
So our listeners can really delve deeper into these strategies and find what works best for them.
Absolutely. And, don't underestimate the power of collaboration either. Talk to your colleagues, share what you're learning, support each other in this journey of creating more inclusive classrooms.
It's a collective effort for sure. So to wrap things up, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into microaggressions in health sciences education.
It's been a pleasure. And to all of our listeners out there, we encourage you to keep learning, keep reflecting, and keep striving to create those learning environments where every student feels valued, respected, and empowered to succeed.
Until next time, keep diving deep.